Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. Now we're going to recap what we saw in Denver's municipal elections on Tuesday night. Of course, high-profile Denver mayoral race. And to be fully transparent, we are recording this Tuesday night. It's about 11 o'clock Tuesday night, so some of these races may be altered, some of the percentages may be altered, but it does appear, Kyle, like Mike Johnston and Kelly Brough are going to advance to be Denver's, to the runoff on June the 6th to be Denver's next mayor. Top-line takeaways from what we saw on the mayor's side of things before we get into everything else.
It was a really difficult night for progressives and for the far left in Denver. You do not, at this point, have a progressive in the runoff for mayor. You have Kelly Brough, who used to run the Chamber of Commerce, and people could disagree about whether she's a center-left or a center-right candidate. But if you're a progressive, you're probably not interested in a center-left or a center-right candidate. You have Mike Johnston, who has some progressive credentials, but he's kind of a New Democrat, Center Democrat, that kind of thing, and a lot of Silicon Valley tech money behind him. So progressives don't really have a favorite in the race for mayor. And when it comes to progressives in the city council races, there's one Democratic Socialist on council, Candy Tabaka. She currently is in a race that's too close to call and is likely going to be headed into a runoff, and a difficult runoff at that. And a number of the other Democratic Socialist endorsed candidates in city council races either got blown out or may not make the two-person runoff. So it's tough to point to any real bright side of the results that we've seen so far for Denver's progressives. Now, they're going to say that maybe Lisa Calderon can make up the gap and squeak into the runoff. And they're gonna base that math on the idea that Kelly Brough's voting base is older, whiter, wealthier, votes earlier. Okay, so she at 11 o'clock tonight has 22.4% of the vote, and Lisa Calderon has 14.8% of the vote. And the thought might be that Calderon's vote would come in late. Okay, except the first serious tranche that we saw of Election Day returns, which was the 10 p.m. update, which was 11,230 ballots, did not move the needle all that significantly for Calderon by about half of a percentage point. And Brough's lead over Calderon, so that's last into the runoff, is still 7,882 votes. Not insurmountable if there was a lot of Election Day voting, and one thing that we don't yet know at this time is how many Election Day votes there were. But that's a not insignificant margin to make up, especially because we're not talking about a candidate in Kelly Brough that solely appealed to older, whiter, wealthier voters, because she had a lot of money behind her message, and she's going to have some residual votes coming in. But the thought is that the bulk of her vote is in there. So that's a tough night for Denver progressives. And Denver progressives are split on the issue of the Park Hill Golf Course. Some want it developed. They think that the deal that has been struck with the developer is fair. It's enough affordable housing. That measure is getting blown out. It's currently down by 20 points. The opponents have declared victory, but you have progressives on both sides of that issue. Democratic Socialists opposed it, where some other progressives, the not in my backyard Democrats, they liked it. So kind of a split measure there. But tough for progressives to get excited about anything they saw tonight.
Were you surprised by the margin of the no vote on the city park, on the Park Hill Golf Course?
Yeah, surprised by the margin. I was not surprised that it appears to be losing. Because again, this is an issue that got put before city voters once to ask, do you want to have a say on this if it's going to be developed? And a lot of money was spent to try and avoid that. And it didn't work. So now people got to vote on it. So the idea that people would suddenly say, I demand the right to vote on this development, but now I'm okay with it. That felt like kind of a tough turn. So I'm not surprised that that's losing. That sets up a really complicated situation in the future with what happens with that property. And it also denies the Hancock administration another signature project on their way out the door. Denver voters that have approved so many things at the ballot box over the last 10 years, projects, taxes, fees, that kind of thing. They said no to Hancock Sports Arena at the National Western Complex, no mid-size arena, the Hancock Dome or whatever we were going to call it, and no Park Hill Development Project, which his administration shepherded through to this point here. So I think the mayor is obviously leaving office with mixed reviews. Is not endorsed in the race because I don't think that it would help anybody in the mayor's race to have his endorsement. And now a project that his administration shepherded to the finish line gets rejected.
So with Brough or Johnston, assuming it's Brough
Yep.
or Johnston, because
Yep.
again, Calderon, you mentioned a little less than 8,000 votes behind. Brough may have a chance of catching up. Assuming it is Brough and Johnston, what sorts of ideas are maybe off the table now, assuming it's one of those two? Because you mentioned
Yep.
they probably both skew towards the center.
Yep. So let me check my cheat sheet. Got a lot of cheat sheets here. So things that Mike Johnston and Kelly Brough agree on, which means if they're in the runoff, these issues are decided. This is what your next mayor in Denver believes. Tougher enforcement of the camping ban.
Okay.
Kelly Brough says she will arrest people for violating the camping ban. Mike Johnston says he will not. No supervised drug injection site. So I wonder if that changes the conversation at the state capitol, as state legislators are again talking about giving municipalities the ability to do this if they want to. Denver is the only municipality in the state that so far has passed an ordinance saying that they want to do it. That happened years ago. And now you could have two people running for mayor who both say, we don't want it. Hire more police. Both Mike Johnston and Kelly Brough want to hire more police officers. And both of them oppose the idea of any type of rent control. Another issue currently being debated at the state legislature that would allow municipalities to opt into some form of rent control. Johnston and Brough say that they're not interested in it. So those are the things that they agree on. They disagree on the idea of arrests over the camping ban. They have a disagreement over the idea of taxpayer money for a future Broncos stadium. Mike Johnston was the only candidate of the 17 we surveyed, when there were 17 in the race, who said that he was supportive of the idea of taxpayer money for a new Broncos stadium. He then tried to walk that back in a debate and say, well, voters should decide if taxpayer money is spent on a Broncos stadium. Well, would you encourage people to do that? Well, I'm not going to say because I don't want to negotiate it publicly. But he was the only one willing to say that. Those are two fairly small differences. But that said, and this is a conversation I was having earlier tonight with City Councilwoman Robin Kniech. Actually, you know what it was? It was former elections spokesman Alton Dillard, who was on our air. Mike Johnston and Kelly Brough appeared to have pretty similar positions when you considered them in a field of 16 that ran the gamut from essentially, Democratic Socialists to Republican. Now, you consider them in isolation next to each other, they're going to have a lot more differences. All right, there's going to be a lot more things that kind of come out at that point. And I think what you're going to see shape up is the narrative, which is just to say a way of describing the way the race moves forward, is Kelly Brough is the continuation candidate, okay? She's the candidate who is most in line with Mayor Hancock's policies, most in line with John Hickenlooper's policies. She was Hickenlooper's chief of staff. Got to remember, Hickenlooper emerged from a crowded field, and the way that he won is that he won Republicans and a lot of centrist Democrats. So that's going to be the coalition that she looks to build. And at this point, 13.1% have voted for Andy Rougeau, the Republican. It's a very respectable finish for a Republican. I would say it's especially a respectable finish for a Republican in a race in Denver, in which Denver Republicans make up 9% of the electorate. That said, Republicans love them some off-year voting. So they're going to show up bigger in an off-year race. But 13%, I think, is very respectable in a race where you have Kelly Brough, who has a lot of conservative positions, as one of the two frontrunners. She's the safe choice if you're a Republican. If you're a Republican who wants to vote for somebody that you think has a really good chance of winning the runoff, Kelly Brough's a lot safer choice than Andy Rougeau. So the fact that Andy Rougeau still pulled 13%, it's a pretty good showing for a Republican. Now, that said, dude dropped $850,000 of his own money into the race. Was it worth $850,000? I don't know. Ask me if the $100 I spent on a concert ticket was a good expense. It was an experience. You know what I mean? Andy Rougeau spent $850,000 of his money to come in what appears to be fourth in the Denver mayor's race. We'll see if he enjoyed the experience for $850,000. You know what I mean? Hey, it's not my money. I'm not gonna judge this man.
He's 34.
I paid a lot to see Bruce Springsteen. But I felt like I got my money's worth. I don't know if Andy feels like he got his $850,000 worth. But all that is to say, Kelly Brough will consolidate that vote. She'll consolidate the vote from the other fairly conservative candidates in the race. Trini Rodriguez, Kwame Spearman, who's already dropped out and endorsed her. Honestly, Democratic State Senator Chris Hansen ran a pretty conservative race. A lot of fear-mongering stuff about crime and homelessness. I would expect him to endorse her. And then the question will be, can Johnston, if it is Johnston in there along with Brough, can he seal the deal with the more progressive candidates? Lisa Calderon, if she doesn't make the runoff, will she be willing to get on board with Mike Johnston? because he's a measure more progressive than Kelly Brough. Leslie Herod, who had honestly a really disappointing finish. I mean, at this point, 5% or number 5 and like 9% of the vote. She was a presumed front runner when she got into this race. Before Mike Johnston got into the race, Kelly Brough was in the race at that point. But the idea that she would finish behind a self-funding Republican who only raised about $50,000 that wasn't from his own pocket, that's a pretty devastating situation for Leslie Herod as somebody who obviously views herself as an up-and-comer in Colorado politics, and she still will be after this race. She's still in the state legislature. She can choose what she wants to try and do next, but that's pretty tough for her. So we'll see. Does she come along with Johnston? You would think so, but who knows? And also, who knows how much an endorsement is worth in the race? Because you got to remember, last time we had an open mayoral race was 2011. And Mayor Hancock, in that first round, finished in second place behind Chris Romer. Third place, just behind Hancock, was James Mejia, our former Democratic political analyst. Mejia endorsed Romer. So Romer comes out of the first round with more votes and the endorsement of the number 3 guy in the race. And they were all in the 20% range. And Romer lost to Hancock. Because the Mejia voters didn't just automatically go over to Romer. So I think people have a chance to make a choice anew. It looks like their choice will be between Brough and Johnston, and I think we'll start to see a lot more differentiation between the two.
I guess another interesting takeaway, I'm sure for you as well here, would be the fact that you mentioned Annie Rougeau's money, but also Brough and Johnston. A lot of money, and money still matters despite the fact that the Fair Elections Fund was supposed to kind of even the playing field, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Fair Elections Fund, this was the first go-around for that taxpayer-approved taxpayer financing of elections. It was a 9-to-1 match for small donations, $50 and under from Denver residents. And that fund paid out $3.4 million to candidates in the mayor's race. 39% of it went to 2 people. It went to Kelly Brough and Mike Johnston because they raised a ton of money from Denver voters. So, and the idea was to incentivize people who don't have the deep political connections to get into the race. And sure enough, there were lots of other people, or 11 other candidates besides the 2 of them, that got Fair Election Fund money. But what did it get them at the end of the day? You know, it got them a stomping at the hands of the 2 people who got 39% of the money, $1.3 million of it. And in addition to that, there were outside groups that came in and spent heavily for those 2 people. $2.2 million in outside spending for Mike Johnston, $984,000 for Kelly Brough. So you add, they raised a lot of money, they got a lot in matches, and they had a ton in outside money that came in for them. And that's tough because it meant that they were on TV with ads constantly. They were able to pay staff well, have big staffs, strong ground game, that kind of thing. And what you saw was Chris Hansen went up early on TV, couldn't sustain it. Lisa Calderon, I don't know that she was ever on TV. She might have been on some cable. Leslie Herod was just briefly on some cable. I mean, that campaign made some perplexing choices. But at the end of the day, Johnston and Brough ran away with the money race, and it looks like they might run away with the first round.
Any final takeaways from tonight?
I think we'll be watching the city council races in the future just to kind of get an idea of where some of the districts are. I think that it will be interesting to see what happens if we have a runoff in which there are far-left candidates or progressive candidates or Democratic Socialists, however you want to describe them, who are in runoffs for city council that don't have a progressive standard bearer in the mayor's race to get them out to vote. If Lisa Calderon is not in the runoff, do her supporters, of which there's a good number, show up to help people in the down-ballot races who share her beliefs?
Interesting.
I don't know. That could be a really tough proposition for them, and then you could see a situation where, you know, it remains to be seen. I mean, at this point, in Candy C. DeBaca's race, in the newly redrawn 9th District, Candy C. DeBaca, the Democratic Socialist incumbent, and one of her challengers are both in the mid-40s. If either of them get to 50% plus 1, the race is over. If nobody gets to 50% plus 1, it goes to a runoff. That could be a dangerous spot for a Candy C. DeBaca, an incumbent member of city council, if you have, from the progressive point of view, 2 relatively unappealing choices for mayor and then her down ballot. That could be tough.
I'm going to close out with a difficult question for
Yeah,
you,
hit
Kyle.
me. Yeah.
If it is Brough or Johnston, who's the favorite?
That's a very good question. I think you would have to say Mike Johnston, because of the fact that he finished marginally ahead of Brough in this first round, and because of his financial advantage. She raised a lot of money, but he got more votes, has more money. What else would we say denotes front runner status? You know what I mean?
Can he coalesce that progressive vote? To your question?
Yeah, I don't know, because progressives don't love Mike Johnston. I mean, the teachers unions have battled him throughout his career as an educator, but I mean, are the teachers unions going to flock to Kelly Brough? I mean, she's the Chamber of Commerce candidate. You know what I mean? So the progressives are going to face a choice between somebody who is an education reformer, which they don't necessarily love, and who's just kind of a traditional centrist Democrat, and then somebody who's kind of like a almost like a center right, like a business first Democrat. Who, I mean, bear in mind, I asked Kelly Brough in a debate, can you think of an instance where what's good for big business isn't good for people? And she said she couldn't come up with an example. Okay, and I believe her. You look at her record, and I believe that that's what she believes. And there are folks in Denver who believe that. A good number of them are going to vote for her. But that sure as hell is not a progressive position. So those will be the choices. I mean, there's already folks saying on social media, I'm not going to vote in the runoff. Okay, that's your choice. You're welcome to sit it out, or you can choose. But if it ends up being Johnston and Brough, I think a lot of people on the left end of the spectrum are going to kind of have to hold their nose and make a choice. And yes, Johnston's the more logical pick, but for the progressives. So I think you'd have to call him the favorite. But at the same time, anything could happen. I would also not rule out a surprising endorsement of somebody that you would think would be on the left with Kelly Brough, because she is somebody who spent her entire career making deals, bringing people together, forming unlikely coalitions to solve problems. One of her chief advisors is Denise Myers, who used to run the ACLU. You wouldn't think the woman who ran the ACLU would be supporting Kelly Brough. Two of them apparently get along famously, and they've been partners throughout this entire campaign. So maybe Denise brings in some unusual people. I would not be surprised if at least one of the folks in the race that's perceived to be to the left ends up with Brough for some reason. Whether they're promised some position, I know we're told that never happens. They're promised some position, some policy change, some something. There's enough people in this race. I mean, here's my cheat sheet. You know, there's 16 of them on the ballot. There's enough people in here that somebody on the left is going to be like, I'm going to put my lot in with Kelly Brough. Will it be enough? I don't know. We'll see.
I guess I keep saying final question. Are you excited to host a debate on May the 16th that doesn't have 16 candidates?
I'm not going to lie, I like those big debates.
You do?
I thought they were fun. They were different. They were interesting. I thought that they reflected like life in the city. Like, because I mean, look at the choice. Look at the choice that's in front of people in the city. Like, a lot of folks up there are going to be like, well, both these folks are too liberal for me. Well, you know what? When we had a 13 candidate debate, when we had an 11 candidate debate, we had somebody up there for you. You know, people are going to look at the Johnston and Brough and say, like, neither of these people are progressive enough for me. Well, geez, when we had 13 and 11 candidate debates, you had 4 or 5 people to choose from. It represented the city. It represented the city. Well, now we have a choice between 2 people. This is how it works. We'll have another debate.
May 16th debate.
Yes, that's what they tell me.
May 16th is the debate. That's what you're told. We're told.
It'll be May 16th.
What we definitely know, it will be May 16th. We will also know that the runoff is on June the 6th. So that will be the case. But Kyle, thanks so much for joining us. And you spent a lot of time in the box tonight, so thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for hanging out in the box with us.